What is going on, OWS Fam, DFS Fam, YouTube Fam? Welcome to the first DFS Lab of Week 16, 2023. I am JM. He is Keegan. We will be opening up this slate. It's a Thursday. We were just talking before the show. There's still a lot of this deep into the season. There's a lot of unknowns on a Thursday, but we will be opening up this slate, talking about it a little bit, getting our thoughts rolling on this slate, building a roster, and using that as an opportunity to poke around in some of the available angles on this slate, and also talk some DFS strategy, DFS theory, become better DFS players. With that, let's get started.
1 week season.
Keegan, my man. So you were saying before we got on air, you did a little bit more poking around on this slate, had a little extra time, but you still kind of felt like it's very early.
Yeah.
Which I think it's kind of, I said in the Angles email that went out this morning, like, I think it's better for OWS members. Smaller slates are better because we are better than the field, generally speaking, at identifying who the true best plays are on the slate. And so with a smaller slate, that gives you less to sort through and fewer options to, like, less noise, right? So it's easier to really narrow down that list. And then also we're better at strategy and theory than the field. And so we have a clearer sense on a small slate of where the field is going to go and then where we can kind of push our edges. But this deep into the season, like a 12-game slate, 13-game slate kind of feels like a 10-game slate mid-season. So like a 9-game slate almost feels like a 6-game slate or something. It's like
it was crazy. Yeah.
Scoring's down. You got all these backup quarterbacks. You got bad matchups. You have injuries. You have, obviously we're in this current iteration of the NFL where a lot of split backfields, not a lot of workhorse backs. And so, it's a very, like, typically if this were week 8, we had a 9-game slate, I'd be like, dude, this is dope. Like, this is right up our alley. 9 games right here is like, man, what is there to do? Any kind of macro thoughts from you on what you've been seeing with this slate?
Yeah. The running backs, I feel like not just this week, but really this whole season feels so much different than last season when it comes to point production and just a whole different dynamic with the backs this season. And I guess that's just the evolution of DFS as we continue, throughout the next few years or whatever. But it just seems so much more thin.
Yeah.
Especially this week as well. Yeah.
It's evolution of DFS and evolution of NFL teams. And one of the things that you hopped into DFS in 2021, 2021. When I hopped in 2014, I used to laugh that so many people rostered Adrian Peterson because he didn't catch passes and it's PPR scoring and he would be priced as like one of the highest priced plays on the slate. And it's like, dude, just play the cheap running backs who catch passes. And then the NFL evolved to where Le'Veon Bell and David Johnson would literally, they would get like 10 to 14 targets per game, plus their 18 plus carries. And it was like so powerful in DFS to have those guys, but also so powerful that other NFL teams saw it and started drafting and developing guys to be those players. But what started happening was these guys would get on their second contracts, get paid big money, and then their bodies would break down because they've been used so much. So it's like over the last few years, NFL teams have really, there's so few workhorse backs, they've really shifted to these split backfields. And that's directly affected DFS because when Le'Veon Bell and it used to be Adrian Peterson would be like 8K. And that was the highest priced running back. And then Le'Veon Bell, David Johnson, it cracked 8K and then it was like 8,600 and it was over 9K. And Levitan coined this term team jam them in, where it was like, just find a salary to jam these guys in. But it was like crazy pricing. But then the NFL, like the NFL has changed. Running back position isn't the same thing, but the pricing hasn't changed. So you still have like, you got guys priced like 7,600, 8,200, and you're like, why wouldn't I just play the wide receivers in these price ranges?
Exactly. That's how.
And then the weirdest thing is, like, it's not like the 5K running backs are really providing you much value either, right? They're all kind of overpriced for their production. So I tweeted kind of jokingly on I think like Tuesday and said, can I just play 6 wide receivers on this slate? I was looking again last night and kind of thinking, if we go top down, right? It's like Rachaad White is a solid play. He's going to be, in fact, we can pull up your, you got your notebook. I love it. We got Rachaad White's kind of a solid play, but like he's 7,400. His best game on the year is 27.9 points, right? So it's not like he's not like going to blow you away. He's not going to bury you for not playing him. And most of the time he's going to get you like 17 to 22 points. I think this Cowboys Dolphin game is very interesting because of this is pretty crazy. I was looking this up this morning. 9 of the Cowboys games have been decided by 20 or more points. So 7 of their wins, they won by 20 or more points. 2 of their losses, they lost by 20 or more. Why is that? Well, it's because when you fall behind to the Cowboys, you become one-dimensional, and they have these exotic pass rush looks, and then Michael Parsons in there. Like, an offense can't deal with that when they become one-dimensional. They have to pass the ball. And so when the Cowboys get ahead, opponents just like have a hard time developing their offense. But on the flip side, the Cowboys aren't great when they become one-dimensional. So teams that, the 49ers blew them out, the Bills blew them out. Both of them did it by running the ball, taking a lead, turning the Cowboys into a one-dimensional team. So I could see the Dolphins really trying to do that this week, especially if Tyreek Hill is still banged up. And so Mostert, is interesting from a ceiling perspective. Jonathan Taylor, bad matchup, but interesting from a ceiling perspective. But generally speaking, like I kind of think like the Bijan Robinson, Aaron Jones, Breece Hall, Chuba Hubbard's going to stand out, I think, on this slate. Yeah. It's almost like you can just get down to that price range and get sort of the same range of outcomes, maybe with a little bit more risk taken on, like Bijan Robinson, who knows what Arthur Smith will do with that offense. But yeah, I mean, I think that it's thin, and that's one of the first things to note, because if it's thin, but then like ownership starts congregating on 1 or 2 guys, that kind of gives us free reign to be like, cool, we'll maybe go to some different guys. Maybe some bad chalk will develop this week. But then also like kind of like if Jonathan Taylor or Mostert, if they don't hit for like a monster game, you're getting the same score, from just these cheaper running backs, as long as you get the ones that actually end up hitting. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, is Achane out? Is he not a possibility as well? Is he?
No, I mean, Achane's a possibility as well. I just his last few games, it was 9 carries, 7 carries, 17 carries, but those 17 carries, a lot of them came in these, if I remember correctly, in the second half of that game that they won 45-15 against Washington. So they're still kind of using him in this limited role, and Mostert, in that same stretch, 15 carries, 21 carries, and then again, 11 carries against Washington, but that was all like he had the first half workload, and then Achane took over when the game was out of hand. So
are you saying like mostly that he gets played when they're up and when the game does get kind of out of hand and it looks like they're going to win?
Yeah. And there's also, we can't know for sure what coaches are going to do, right? Bijan Robinson had been seeing the bulk of the workload for Atlanta. And then all of a sudden last week, Tyler Algier was like a much bigger part of the game plan. A few weeks ago, Devin Singletary had that hot run. It's pretty crazy, right? Devin Singletary had that hot run when Dameon Pierce was out. First game with Dameon Pierce back, their carries were almost the same. So that's all people were looking at the box score. But Singletary had played 80% of snaps. So the next week I was like, dude, all in on Singletary, right? And then that was the week where Dameon Pierce got more carries, scored his touchdown. And then that was the 1 week blip. And ever since then, it's been Singletary again. So it's like sometimes we don't know what these backfields are going to do. But generally speaking, Achane is kind of like their changeup that they're putting out. He's going to get his 7 to 10 touches, but it's like he's their changeup back that they're wanting to change up the speed, change up the look that the defense is getting, but they're not giving him the full workload. So like that 17 carry game in the box score, it looks like one thing, but the reality of it was like, and I have to go back and look at that game again to be completely sure, but I was watching that game, and if I remember correctly, it was like the whole second half turned into an Achane show, and Mostert was like, okay, let's rest him, So yeah, I mean, I think that, and we saw it earlier this year, right? He had 151 yards on 11 carries. Like he had 101 yards on 8 carries. So he's still viable in that regard. But yeah. I think that and also the catches are valuable, 3, 5, and 3 his last 3 games. So yeah, I wouldn't totally cross him off the list. He's way overpriced for like his touches, but he can still post a big game. So yeah, I think that's a good shout there on
Definitely the points you need possibility type of.
Yeah. And also like realistically, right? If we're not getting 4x from any running backs and you get 22 points from Achane, like that ends up working. It's almost one of those unique pairings where, like I said, how you beat the Cowboys, obviously the Cowboys, they just got, what did Josh Allen threw the ball 13 times? We've never seen that. Cowboys just got crushed by James Cook. So their whole emphasis this week is going to be like, we cannot get beat on the ground like this. So just because that happened doesn't mean it's going to happen again. But realistically, if you are the Dolphins and you see like Cowboys have been blown out twice, and both of them were teams that could control the game on the ground, make the Cowboys one-dimensional. The whole story with the Cowboys is like, just don't fall behind, because if you fall behind, you got to drop back and pass, and they know that you're going to pass. Like, you're in so much trouble against this defense. So, I mean, I could see realistically a scenario in which Mostert plus Achane ends up being optimal on this slate. Like, they could combine for 50 plus points, and that could be the best running back pairing that you could get, regardless of the fact that they're teammates. So, yeah, I mean, this is just a really interesting week at the running back position.
See, this is the dilemma that I've gone through. The same thing with Bijan Robinson. Like you said last week, I think it adds a lot of uncertainty to if he's going to be popular this week or not. And I'm also wondering if I'm even going to play him as much because of last week alone.
Yeah. One thing we've also seen is, this has been in the past, that the Packers like go hard at limiting Aaron Jones touches. And then there will come a point in the season when their season is on the line, and it's like, oh, we literally need to win. And all of a sudden we go back through past seasons and look at the box scores, and there will be like this sudden stretch where Aaron Jones is getting 17 to 25 touches per game for like 3 or 4 games. So, the Packers 7-7, right on the cusp of that playoff hunt. It would take some faith to like kind of pull the trigger on that, because we don't know. But on such a thin week, that's one of the places where you could be like, God, it's a great match against Carolina. We did just see the Falcons, which, who can plumb the depths of Arthur Smith's mind, but we did just see the Falcons kind of use their AJ Dillon type back in Tyler Algier last week against the Panthers, and kind of limit Bijan Robinson, who's more of an Aaron Jones type player, limit Bijan Robinson in that matchup. So, maybe the Packers will see something similar, but this is the type of spot where you could see the Packers unleash Aaron Jones a little bit more and be like, hey, look, we got to win these games. Who cares about protecting his body? It doesn't matter if he's healthy in the playoffs, if we're not in the playoffs. So, that's another one. I mean, it's weird because we're used to running back, like the pieces kind of line up to where it's like, oh, I have like 3, 4, 5 running backs in my pool, and then like some fringe guys who maybe could hit. This week it's so thin that, because I mean, Jeffrey Simmons is like the great run stopper for Tennessee. He looks like he's going to be out again this week. So all of a sudden, Kenneth Walker is a little bit interesting. I mean, there's just so many different ways that you could paint the picture of running back this week, where it's like, this guy could hit, this guy could hit. It's tough to narrow this position down.
Yeah, I like Breece Hall as well. I think you had mentioned him. He's in my my pool of guys.
I mean, if there's a game that the Jets could stay close in, and score some touchdowns in, because really, I mean, his pass catching role is so robust. Obviously, throughout last week, but before that, 8 catches, 6 catches, 7 catches, 5 catches. I mean, that's a tremendous stretch of games. So then if he adds a touchdown to that, the big issue is this team doesn't score a lot of touchdowns, but can't they score some touchdowns against Washington? Kind of wish that Zach Wilson was going to be healthy this week, because that would obviously be better for the offense than Trevor Siemian. But I mean, I think in terms of Breece Hall's targets, it doesn't matter if it's Trevor Siemian or Zach Wilson. But in terms of like their chances of scoring touchdowns, they would have been a slightly better chance of scoring touchdowns with Zach Wilson. But I mean, I think that Breece Hall very much is like, he's one of the safest plays in this bunch, because his role in the pass game is so assured, so his floor is so high, and then he can hit for big plays on top of that. So, I'm glad that we kind of started this running back position, because it's such a weird position on this week. I feel like quarterback's kind of different. That's like, there's not that much that stands out. Curious your thoughts on, I shouldn't say there's not that much stands out. There's things that stand out, and they stand out like at a higher level than other things on the slate. And so it's like a little bit easier to parse down, okay, here would be my core list at quarterback. What have you been seeing at that position?
Yeah. So, I mean, you got your obvious, the top, the expensive guys that you're probably going to play in a couple lineups and such. But I do want to mention this just because it was so strange. Last night, I had a dream about Trevor Lawrence, like absolutely having a bomb game, scoring like 50 plus points and like 4 touchdowns. It was a crazy number, and he just went crazy. And if he does play, I think he's also on my list.
I love that, man. I love that. I remember there was an MLB slate one time where I was like, I couldn't like crack the slate, and I was like, man, I got to take a shower, try to clear my head. and I was like taking a shower. Like there was just one player whose name popped into my head, and I was like, dude, that's the ticket. He went 0 for 5. Like, just had this awful game. I was like, all right, well, never mind. But I don't know about the dream. The dream, that's a different category. You know what? It's like the Amari Cooper thing we talked about last week, where like Amari was 40% of my player pool 2 weeks ago. Not because he was like a 40% owned play, like he was that good of a play, but it was just like, you know, he would have been 15 or 20% of my pool, and he wasn't cleared from concussion until Saturday night. And so then it was like, oh, literally nobody's going to be on him. With a guy like Trevor Lawrence, you know, obviously a high profile player, if he were to get cleared from concussion protocol on Saturday night, he wouldn't be like 1% owned, but he would be lower owned than like if we had a full week of Trevor Lawrence against Tampa Bay with a pretty like thin slate, generally speaking. He would get steamed up as like probably the second highest owned quarterback on the slate behind Justin Fields would be my guess. So yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where he gets cleared on Saturday night. He's going to have like what 5, 6, 7% ownership because people will pivot, but like not pivot enough. Like it'll be half the ownership he would have had if we had a full week of talking about Trevor Lawrence. Even better there is looks like Zay Jones is going to be out this week. Obviously, Christian Kirk already out. So you have like a much more narrow distribution of targets. You got Parker Washington, Calvin Ridley, Evan Ingram. Like, you know that the ball is going to one of those three guys. So no, I like that shout. And honestly, it kind of makes me think if Lawrence is out, why couldn't CJ Beathard come in and have a good game? And that's a guy I really hadn't thought about yet. Which actually kind of brings me to, I mean, like, look at this. Nick Mullins put up 22.1 last week. Joe Flacco has put up 22.9, 25.3, and 17.2 in these last 3 weeks. People really underestimate sometimes the value that we can get from these backups stepping in. And then also the value these backups can provide. One of the things I thought was really interesting, you know, Jordan Addison put up 32 point something points on Saturday. Jordan Addison was like, I had like 10 to 15% Jordan Addison 2 weeks ago when Justin Jefferson came back, and it ended up being Josh Dobbs under center. In that game against the Raiders, it was 3-0. So obviously, like, it didn't work out for my rosters, but what we see is these situations where it's like thin slates, and then people are just like, well, it's thin, let me just go to the best on paper plays. And you look at a guy like Jordan Addison, who is extremely talented, and like we saw Jamar Chase hit with Jake Browning, right? Just because Jordan Addison's playing with a backup quarterback doesn't mean he can't hit. And so when these slates get thinner like this, like, ownership gets so condensed on the best on paper plays. And so obviously Jordan Addison was on the Saturday slate this last week, but if he were on the main slate, what would his ownership have been? It would have been what, 2%, 3%? And he put up 32.1 DraftKings points, you know, in the 5K price range. So it's like, we can be looking for situations like this where the field is just waiting for more information. And realistically, like, maybe we still end up getting, like, so many quarterbacks have put up good games against Tampa Bay. CJ Beathard's kind of one of these frantic, frenetic, like, he's going to run around and try to make plays. He's going to throw interceptions because he's trying to chuck the ball up to his playmakers. He's going to try to run the ball and he's going to fumble it. But like, he's also going to be trying to make plays out of structure, and that can lead to big plays and kind of lead to these higher outcomes. Like Joe Flacco, if they call a deep pass, he literally doesn't even check to see if the guy's covered or not. He just throws it, you know, like, which is why you see like 3 interceptions, 1 interception. He should have had more than these 5 interceptions in these 3 games as well. But he also then hits for big plays because he's just like, dude, I'm just going to chuck the ball downfield, you know? So Beathard could be one of those. Maybe your dream was like to point you toward the Jags. And if Trevor Lawrence is out, like, I mean, realistically, pull up Justin Fields game logs real quickly. He's got the obviously limited with the injuries this year, but he's got the 33 and the 32.9 pointers against Washington and Denver. Those were through the air. Those were 4 passing touchdown games. Those were games where he had 57 rushing yards in one, but 25 in the other, no rushing touchdowns. That's it, right? All the rest of his games, he hasn't topped 25 DraftKings points. And then he had the 2 40-pointers last year, and the rest of the season, he didn't top 25 DraftKings points. So it's like, I love Justin Fields this week. He's the play that stands out on paper, but It's like, couldn't he just put up 24 points and then maybe CJ Beathard at significantly less salary, or Joe Flacco or whoever else puts up the same score, and you save that salary and just have a lot more flexibility. So I do think it's interesting this week to kind of look to guys like that.
Yeah, and one thing I've been curious, I never like looked up the stat. It's probably pretty easy to figure it out, but I was curious if the games that Justin Fields does pop off on, the 30+ point games, does Cole Kmet follow with that? Like, obviously he might get a touchdown, but from the games that I've seen, usually he feeds Cole Kmet in these passing games that he gets these 30+ points in.
Yeah. So last year they didn't have DJ Moore. So last year Kmet hit for 2 touchdown receptions in both of the games where Fields hit. And then this year he had 27.6 and 15.2. So the 15.2 isn't like, oh, we had to have that score, but basically 3 out of the 4 times that Fields has hit, Kmet has hit. Both times that Fields has hit this year, DJ Moore has hit. The great thing about that offense is they literally just throw the ball to 2 guys, right? Like, look through the box scores at the end. It's like Darnell Mooney has 3 targets and Equimania St. Brown has like 1 target, and the rest of them go to DJ Moore and Cole Kmet. So it ends up being a really nice setup because like we talk about, if we get Sam Howell correct earlier in the season, like you still are just getting 1 spot correct because there's so much guesswork on who might hit with him. Whereas if you like the weeks when you got Desmond Ridder right, like that you're getting Drake London right as well. The weeks when you get Justin Fields right, that you're getting DJ Moore and Cole Kmet correct as well. And so it's like you get 3 spots right by getting 1 thing right. So that is one of the values of a Justin Fields and the fact that he can produce like tournament winning types of scores for these guys. So CJ Beathard, you might get him right, but you're getting him right like 20 points at his price tag is solid, but that doesn't necessarily mean that any of his pass catchers are popping off for big games. So yeah, there is definitely a little bit of an edge there in Fields. Actually, interesting. The Bears, we talked about this last week before Njoku went off against the Bears. That entire Bears defense is structured to take away wide receivers and filter targets to running backs and tight ends. And so, you tend to see, whether the production's there or not, you tend to see a lot of targets to tight ends against this Bears defense. So last week that ended up following with Njoku getting 10 catches, 104 yards, I think it was, and a touchdown. They're playing Trey McBride this week, who just last week in literally like the toughest tight end matchup went 10 for 102. So you could go Fields, Kmet, DJ Moore, throw Trey McBride in the flex, and you have like, that is the most straightforward stack possible on this slate. And I don't think that it'll be like Fields will be owned, but most people don't do a good enough job just putting the whole bet together. But it's like, if Fields hits, it's in a game environment where there's points being scored. It's in a game where Kmet and DJ Moore are also hitting. And maybe they don't both hit for tournament winners, but like you're getting at least a solid score from one of them and a really good score from the other. And then if the game's staying close, it's almost certainly Trey McBride who's doing stuff through the air against Chicago. So it's like a very clear and obvious package bet that's head and shoulders above any other package bets on the slate. And I just don't think it'll be pursued at the level that it should be.
I definitely agree. I think there's a ton of upside to that like entire little box bet as a whole. I think the only downside would be the price point of Justin Fields. And is there going to be anybody, like you said with the backups, is there going to be anybody lower that hits for the same amount of points?
Right. And I think that's kind of the way we always want to think about what's the structure of the slate and what are we chasing, right? So it's like, if we roster one of the cheap guys, what we need is for Justin Fields to miss. Because the cheap guys, and crazy things happen, right? Baker Mayfield, had 1 game this year of 23.9 points. Everything else had been 21.4 and below. And then all of a sudden he goes out for 33 last week. It's like crazy things can happen. You can get these big scores from these guys. Obviously you can see the signs. We've talked about it with Mayfield this year of like, okay, he hasn't hit for a big game yet, but he has games of 300 passing yards. He has games with 3 passing touchdowns. Like those can all fall into place together. He can hit a big game. But realistically, what's likeliest is that none of these cheap guys top like 23, 24 points, right? So then if Fields only hits 23, 24, then it was more optimal to go the other direction. The thing with Fields is he has very clear like 35 plus point upside within his range. And so we have to think about that as well. So yeah, the downside is like, well, what if you spend this extra salary and then Fields is just producing the same score? Well, in that case, you're not winning the tournament anyway, right? And so it doesn't like you wouldn't want to hedge by saying, and I know you know this, you're just kind of like talking to the audience, but you wouldn't want to hedge by saying, okay, well, what if Fields only scores 24? So now I won't do the full stack because I want to account for what if he scores 24. Well, if he only scores 24, you're not winning a tournament anyway. So we want to build for like, what happens if we get the bet right? Well, if we get the bet right, then Fields is posting a score that nobody else can catch on this slate, or probably nobody else can catch on this slate. Like we're looking at I'm looking at Nick Mullins and Joe Flacco and CJ Beathard as like attractive quarterbacks on this slate, on this cheap price range. Gardner Minshew, like these are all backups, like literal backup quarterbacks, right? And then you got Justin Fields against the Cardinals. So yeah, I mean, if Fields goes for his high end, I don't think any of these guys can catch him. And if he goes for his high end, well, then we know who's coming up with him, right? So it ends up being like, yeah, the downside is this side. But I mean, I do think this is the stack that the field needs to try to beat. And I don't think the field, like if we took Fields ownership, will probably be like 15% this week, just because he stands out so much on paper. DJ Moore, for some reason, people just can't embrace DJ Moore. It's funny because he was always like over-owned relative to his expectations in the past with bad quarterbacks. And it's almost like people are like, oh, well, Justin Fields isn't good, so I won't roster DJ Moore. DJ Moore probably gets, it's like we've seen Russell Wilson have 12% ownership, but Cortland Sutton have like 6 or 7%, right? I don't think it'll be like that, but I don't think DJ Moore is going to be 30% owned. I think he'll probably be in line with Justin Fields. So we kind of take all this ownership, right? And obviously McBride will be popular, but if you say like how many rosters have Fields, Kmet, DJ Moore, and McBride, I would say probably under 1%, right? So even though these individual plays will be popular, I just don't think we'll see this full stack super often. And then that ends up being like, realistically, this is the stack that people have to try to beat in their rosters in the way that they build in other games, or in context of us, like when we're building rosters without Fields and this stack, we need to be thinking, okay, if that stack hits, what are the ways that I could build that could like outscore that stack? Like what has as much ceiling as that, or kind of the pathways to outscoring that type of stack. So yeah, I mean, I think with that, should we start a roster with that and kind of see what it would look like from a salary?
Absolutely. One more thing I do want to add is if we do a stack, another thing we could add is we could play a defense against one of these backups, saying that they are going to miss.
I like that. I like that a lot. Yeah, very sharp. Gain a little bit of leverage by attacking one of these backup quarterbacks that's going to be popular.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so we're going to grab DJ Moore, Kmet, and Trey McBride. DJ Moore.
Man, the Jets are only 3,100 going against, I would presume, Sam Howell. Sam Howell got benched last week. The magic has worn off, but yeah, I mean, the Bucs are only, I would expect the Bucs to be popular against CJ Beathard, but only 2,600. I mean, I think that's a nice leverage spot to go to.
Cool. And then we can grab a defense, and you're looking already. So the ones that I have, I mean, I didn't even like really look at, I always glance at defense until like Sunday morning. But what I have right now is Cardinals, Vikings, Browns, Texans, Colts. And I was looking at the Jets, but I was nervous because I have the Jets on a thing where I actually am hoping that they're going to have a high scoring game as well. And I want to make a few lineups based on that.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, one thing you can always do is kind of hedge. So it's like, if I get this bet right, I'm making money here. If I get it wrong, I'm making money over here. Yeah, I don't know how, I would think that of the backups, the one that will probably be most popular would be Joe Flacco. And that would kind of actually, we didn't even mention Case Keenum. So there's like, we can attack the backups in that we could, or the backups or guys who are playing like backup caliber players right now. Like we could play the Jets against Sam Howell, assuming he's in line to start. We could play, if Drew Lock is going to be under center again, we could play Tennessee against Drew Lock. We could play the Bucs against CJ Beathard. We can play the Browns against Case Keenum. But if we're going to say like, hey, let's get leverage, I do think that the one backup who's going to actually end up being popular would be Joe Flacco. So that would be playing the Texans defense against Joe Flacco, which I think is a really interesting way to go because Joe Flacco, the 5 picks in 3 games, but he also has thrown a lot more turnover worthy passes than just that. So doesn't save a salary, but does get us like clear leverage.
Yeah.
So that's one way we could go, or we could just say, like, screw the leverage angle and just grab whichever defense we like the most. I'll throw it over to you for you to make that decision.
Yeah, I think what we can do is throw the Texans in there, and then obviously we're going to try and build this. And if we need to go down, always.
Yeah, we've got salary flexibility. We don't have to play the Texans. They're one of the more expensive defenses, but
I'm married to it. So
yeah, definitely a nice leverage there.
I do think we should maybe try and save some salary on the running back position and maybe try to grab Chuba Hubbard. Obviously, he's probably going to be popular this week, but we have a great little boxed in lineup that I like.
Exactly. And I think, and this is an important thing, I think, that people who are newer to these types of concepts maybe don't think about, is that our cumulative ownership on this roster would probably be pretty high. I'd expect Trey McBride to be one of the most popular plays on the slate. I would expect Fields to be the most popular quarterback. I would expect Chuba Hubbard to be popular. So, like, if you just look at, add up all the ownership, this roster has too much ownership on it, right? It can't win a tournament. But when you look at like that, the structure of the ownership and the fact that we're going to have this block of players from this game that most people won't have, and we're actually completing the bet that other people aren't completing with their, popular exposure to these plays, it really doesn't matter that Hubbard will be popular because we have this block of plays together that all correlate well together and won't be owned at a high level. So yeah, I like that call. Ride with the ownership there, ride the sharp play there. I wouldn't mind throwing in. I mean, we don't want to go too cheap just to save salary when you've we don't want to go to 5K or something just to save salary when you've got Breece Hall at 6,100, Bijan Robinson 63, Aaron Jones 64. Any of those guys that you want to grab above any of the others?
Really would like to grab Breece Hall, but I mean, again, if we have to pivot down, we can always do that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know where.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same with
you. I don't know where we
have a list that's like super cheap, and I've been looking. I just don't see anybody that has the upside to pop off.
Yeah, and then in terms of savings, one of the most interesting pieces on this slate is going to be Jamal Agnew, who super speedy guy, great punt returner, great in the open field. Every once in a while, the Jags will have these design plays for him. He's only 3,400. Every once in a while, they'll have these design plays for him to just get him the ball in space. But again, with the injuries to the Jags wide receiver core, he's going to be out there a lot more. And it's one of those where, like, his low end is probably 6 or 7 points, but that doesn't kill you. But his high end is like a good 18 to 25 points because he can score from anywhere on the field.
Do you think he's going to be pretty chalky this week just because of how many injuries are on that team? Or
I would think so. And I would think that I would actually guess, and I could be totally wrong with this, but I would actually guess that just because Agnew has kind of that ball in his hands upside, I would expect him to be more popular than Parker Washington. So if we wanted on this, Parker Washington's only 400 more. So if we wanted on a roster like this, we could be like, deeper into the week, it's like, this ownership is not great for us or whatever. Or we want to do something a little bit different. We can look at ownership projections and lean on those and kind of go a different direction if need be. But yeah, I mean, there's nobody who's like leaps off the screen under 5K, but there's plenty of solid options, right? Brandon Cooks and Curtis Samuel, Jahan Dotson, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Dontavian Wicks. And then, getting down to these Jags wide receivers. And obviously there's going to be one of these games where Jameson Williams hits for a big game. Who knows if that happens this season or not, but he's one of those guys that always take a few dart throws on in large field play. But and I mean, that gives us some nice salary flexibility to, I guess, mess around with. We've got these guys in the 6K range, or we might pivot down at defense and try to get up to Mike Evans or Jalen Waddle. We won't have the salary to get all the way up to Keegan.
What?
Take the Texans off. Go down to the Bucks. We have the salary to get all the way up to Justin Jefferson.
So actually, that's great because I actually wanted to have a conversation about that. I have a question mark next to Justin Jefferson, and I've been wanting to know your full thoughts on everything with the backup quarterbacks, and is he still, the best wide receiver in the league, so on and so forth.
Yeah. I mean, obviously Tyreek Hill has something to say about best wide receiver in the league, but we saw Jordan Addison put up 32 points last week with Nick Mullins. You know what I mean? So it's like when you look and say, can Justin Jefferson put up 30 plus points? Kirk Cousins was literally playing as like a top 5 quarterback. So there's a downgrade there. It's not like Justin Jefferson's going to hit 30 points week in and week out like he was doing with Kirk Cousins. I mean, we look at the start of the season. What was it? 4 healthy games before he got hurt. He had 26.5 or more DraftKings points in every game. Last year, he hit for like 27 plus in 50% of his games. This year, he started out hitting 26.5 plus in 100% of his games with Kirk Cousins. So that's not going to be there. But the trade-off of the lower ownership and the ceiling that he brings, because I think a lot of people, it's not like we're going to see Justin Jefferson. Imagine last year, Justin Jefferson at 8,100. Like he would have been 35% owned, 8,100 in a good matchup. You can't run against Detroit. This is Minnesota can still win the division because they have 2 games left against Detroit. So they need Detroit to lose the game in the middle. They need to win out. They need to beat Detroit twice. But like, this is one of those games where you can see that aggressiveness developing if Detroit is able to push the ball and score against Minnesota. So yeah, it's one of those spots where he's not going to project all that well, and therefore he's not going to be super high owned. But he's still the kind of guy who can go out and put up 35 plus points. And it's a slate where there probably won't be that many 35 pointers, if any 35 pointers, right? So just the ceiling there. And when you trade it off with like, who else is available in this price range? You got Jalen Waddle, who obviously could hit, but Tyreek Hill's expected to be back, even if he's a little bit gimpy. We would expect the Dolphins to try to develop the run game. You got Mike Evans, who's like has that ceiling, but super hit or miss. Michael Pittman's going to be out. And then we're down to like Nico Collins in a horrible matchup, DK Metcalf, who's topped 20 points once with Geno Smith, Amari Cooper with Joe Flacco's solid play. But like, when you compare what else we're kind of shopping through with Justin Jefferson, it's like, man, yeah, the quarterback situation isn't ideal, but it's not impossible for him to hit. Like one of the things I was heavy on last week was Noah Brown. And it was the same thing. It was like, he was 5K and everyone was going to stay off him because CJ Stroud was out. But it's like, well, he's the alpha wide receiver. Everybody else is hurt. He's the alpha wide receiver in this great offense. They're going to be able to scheme him open. He didn't get the 100-yard bonus, but he still went 8 for 82 and a touchdown. And like the game could have broken a different way to where he could have put up 30 points, So yeah, I like looking for spots like this where people will be putting that question mark next to Justin Jefferson. And that's the type of spot that I want to embrace and say, like, I would rather lose because I played a bunch of, like, I wasn't upset 2 weeks ago when I had a bunch of Jordan Addison and he bombed, because I knew that what he did last week was in the range of outcomes. I won't be upset if I lose because I play a bunch of low-owned Justin Jefferson and he doesn't have a good game. But I would be upset if I lost because I didn't have Justin Jefferson and he went off to 35 points at low ownership at 8,100 in a good matchup. So, yeah, I mean, I think that he's an extremely sharp play this week and could easily be, I mean, Miami's been tough against wide receivers. Amon-Ra St. Brown obviously can hit, but has kind of like his ceiling games typically aren't as high as what Justin Jefferson can post. So, yeah, I mean, to me, Justin Jefferson is the top guy when you take into account ownership, range of outcomes, put it all together. So, yeah, I mean, I really like that little move right there to get him in this roster.
Yeah, man, this roster is super solid, and I love building these rosters with you every week. I mean, it does help.
I'm like looking at the whole roster for the first time right now. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, it is insane. It's crazy.
It's a pretty insane roster.
If you look at this like another week, you would think this is a very high ownership projected roster. But like you said, it's the way we did it that changes that up.
Yeah, that player block is going to be low owned. I would imagine Justin Jefferson will be moderately owned at most. And also it's just like a lot of times you see the rosters in first place in a tournament and you're like, oh God, that was so obvious. Why do they overthink things so much? And it's not that they're still doing something different, which like this roster right here, but this very much looks like a roster that it would finish in first place and people would be like, God, why didn't I see this roster? Like it's so straightforward.
And it's crazy because you see those rosters in first place and you're like, how is this not duplicated in this exact tournament?
Yeah.
Like, how is there not a second one of these and they're tied for first?
Yeah, this is definitely one of those types of rosters. Yeah. And because of the Kmet plus McBride, because of the full stack in that Bears Cardinals game, even though these will be popular players, they're popular because they're really sharp plays. Like it's just not going to be combinatorially popular. Hubbard plus Breece Hall will probably be a somewhat popular pairing, but again, it doesn't matter as much to us because of the way this is put together. And then again, like Justin Jefferson is one of these plays that I could see him getting up to 15% owned. But like I said, in the past, if he were at this price tag in this matchup with Kirk Cousins under center, he'd be 35% owned, 40% owned. And so 15%. And then we already said like our full stack of Fields, Kmet, DJ Moore, Trey McBride, that full stack probably on 1% of rosters. So then if we assume that Justin Jefferson is only on 15% of those, that means that like 0.15% of a tournament field would have that starting point, right? Of this full block from the Bears game plus Justin Jefferson. And like, we're so far ahead of the field if we get 2 bets right, which is just, the Bears and Cardinals scoring some points and Justin Jefferson having a big game. We get those 2 bets right. And we're basically, everybody else is chasing us for first place on this slate. And then we just have kind of like solid popular plays. So it makes it that much harder for people to catch us, right? Because they have to take like suboptimal plays to try to leapfrog us and make up those points. And I think that's one of the things that when you look at those rosters in first place, if you reverse engineer them, the players are obvious, but also you can kind of see stuff like this where it's like, oh, like they got 2 things right that put them way ahead of the field. And then the other pieces just like blocked people from catching them and passing them because they just didn't make mistakes in their other spots. And that's really what we're doing here is we're trying to get one thing right that launches us ahead of everybody. And then sort of block everybody from catching us with just straightforward plays elsewhere. Man, we can almost wrap up this week and just do no more prep or research. We got duplicate lineups. Let's not publish this show. Duplicate lineups.
Yeah, I think I'm just going to use this one this week.
We're good to go. I'll use it in high dollar stuff. You use it in low dollar stuff, and we'll be set. We'll roll forward. Anything else from you before we get out of here?
No, man, I'm super excited to talk about tomorrow and they have this.
Yeah, this made me a lot more excited for this week doing this roster. Cool, man. Yeah, fun as always. I think we got some good stuff today. Obviously, I feel like we got some good stuff today. Anything exciting for you next few days? Christmas stuff?
No, nothing exciting. Nothing really crazy at all. I may have a job interview for
nice
IT stuff, but besides that, nothing crazy. Everybody in the comments, I will try and look and see. I haven't been really doing that lately just because life has been kind of crazy. So
life has been crazy.
But comment some stuff, ask JM some questions, and I'll be the mediator and I'll ask and he can answer.
Love it. Cool. As always, thanks for hanging out with us. We will see you. Keegan and I will be recording again tomorrow, Friday. That'll go live on Friday night or Saturday morning. So we will see you back here for that. We will see you on 1 week season throughout the weekend, and we'll see you at the top of the leaderboards on Sunday.